This is a 2019 Audi RS5 Sportback, and it's my favorite new Audi. Last year I made a video telling you that the Audi RS3 was the best new Audi, but the RS5 Sportback has just gone on sale, and it's better. And today I'm going to explain why. I've borrowed this RS5 Sportback from Audi Fletcher Jones here in Orange County, California, in Costa Mesa, where this car is just starting to arrive, just starting to go on sale, and it couldn't be more overdue. For years, the BMW M3 and the Mercedes-AMG C63 have owned this high-performance sedan segment, and Audi hasn't directly competed with those cars in North America since the RS4 sedan was canceled more than a decade ago. That changes now. Yes, the RS5 Sportback is Audi's first true M3 competitor in ages, and it looks pretty good on paper. This car has a twin-turbo V6 with 444 horsepower, mated to standard all-wheel drive, and an 8-speed automatic transmission. Now, the base price for an RS5 Sportback is around $75,000, which makes it about $8,000 more expensive than a base-level M3, but the RS5 Sportback has 20 more horsepower than the M3, and it has another secret weapon: it's more practical. That's because the RS5 Sportback is a sporty sedan hatchback thing and not just a regular old sedan. And it joins the RS5 Coupe in Audi's lineup. I welcome this addition because I just made a video complaining about how Audi doesn't give us their best high-performance models. They've deprived the North American market of the RS4 and the RS6 for so long. But finally, it's looking like that's starting to change, and I couldn't be happier. So today I'm going to show you around the RS5 Sportback, and I'm going to show you all the interesting quirks and cool features of my favorite new Audi. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the RS5 Sportback, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of the cheapest used European luxury performance sedans currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. I'm going to start the quirks and features under the hood, and specifically with the battery. Now, when you open up the hood, you'll notice you don't really see the battery anywhere in the engine bay, and that's because Audi has hidden the battery somewhere where it's better for them, either under some stuff where it's more convenient for packaging, or in the back for better weight distribution. But you're thinking, well, if the battery is hidden, how could I possibly jump my RS5 Sportback if the battery dies? Audi has thought of that. They have installed a positive battery terminal under the hood in the engine compartment, so you can still jump it, but that allows them to relocate the battery somewhere else so it doesn't take up valuable space. Now, that's a smart placement, but a more unusual one is the location of the windshield washer fluid filler tank. Now, when I open the hood in a car, I always look around for all the usual stuff, but in this car, I couldn't find where you put in the windshield washer fluid. I was about to give up until I noticed it over on the passenger side, way in the back by the hinge to open up the hood. I couldn't believe it was over there. It's such a strange, out-of-the-way placement for it. Finally, one other cool quirk under here are these little screws that hold on this little plastic piece at the front of the engine bay. If you look closely, you'll see they're not traditional screws, but instead they all have the Audi logo on them. That is really cool, something that most people will never notice, but it's a nice little piece of attention to detail for those of us who do notice. Now, next up, I want to talk about the front turn signals. Now, in other Audi reviews I've done, I've talked a lot about the rear turn signals and how they conform to US government regulations, but I haven't touched much on the front turn signals. And there's an interesting happening that occurs when you put on the front turn signals. You can see this car has these LED running lights. All Audis do, basically all new cars do, but when you put on the turn signal, the LED running light disappears and instead the turn signal blinks. That is regulatory. The turn signal is not allowed to compete with a light as bright as the LED running light in this car. So when you put on the turn signal in a car with bright LED running lights, they generally have to dim the running light in order for the turn signal to be seen. Now, obviously, when the turn signal turns off, that LED running light can turn back on and make the front of the car symmetrical once again. Next up on the outside, a couple of other interesting quirks, these related to badging. I want to start in the front with this cool Quattro badge at the base of the grille. I love how that looks except there's a problem. As you can see, it's covered up by the front license plate. In places where the front license plate is required, it's kind of a shame that front Quattro badge is obscured, which is sad because it is a really cool look on there. It reminds me of old Quattro rally cars from back in the day. Another interesting item, when you open up the door in this car at night or in a parking garage, you can see it has a projection that says Audi Sport coming out of the door. Now, a regular Audi just has the 4-ring logo, but the RS models say Audi Sport to remind you that you spent more for more performance. And that isn't the only reminder of that decision in a place you might not expect. Pop open the fuel door and you will see that the gas cap doesn't just say Audi or nothing like it could. Instead, it says RS on it, reminding you that you have the highest performance Audi when you're filling your car up with fuel. Next up, while I'm still outside the RS5 Sportback, before I move in, I want to talk about one other thing, and that would be this car's styling. I absolutely love how this car looks. Obviously, it's a gorgeous car, well proportioned, good lines, nothing bulbous or controversial or crazy, but that isn't the reason why I love it. I love it because this car passes what I call the wife test, which means if my wife, who's not into cars, took a look at it, would she know that it's a performance car? And the answer in this case is no. Now, some people wouldn't like that. Some people like their performance cars to be showy and crazy and they want everybody to know that they're fast, but I like my performance cars to be subtle and sort of restrained. Don't let the color fool you. You get one of these things in silver or gray and no one will know that you have one of the fastest 4-door cars on the market. Of course, some people will probably figure out that your car is rather special because even though this is a small 2.9-liter turbo V6, it has a pretty nice engine note. Take a listen. But while the styling is definitely one of my favorite things about the RS5 Sportback, I have to say I also absolutely love the fact that it's a hatchback. I've always really enjoyed high-performance cars that are also practical, so you can combine like family transport and going 150 miles an hour. And so I like cars like the BMW M3, the Mercedes C63, high-performance sedans are pretty practical, but this takes it to a whole new level, the high-performance 4-door hatchback, and it's actually pretty roomy back here. A regular Audi A4 has 13 cubic feet of cargo space in the trunk. This thing has 50% more, 21 cubic feet of cargo space in the trunk of this car. Audi won't give us a high-performance wagon, the RS4 and the RS6 Avant, but this is, frankly, the next best thing. And you can get even more cargo space if you want. You can remove this cargo cover in the back here, and you can put down the rear seats, and if you do that, you have one giant unimpeded cargo area, far better and far larger than just a trunk in a sedan with the seats folded down, and you can get 35 cubic feet of whatever you want to put back here. And speaking of the back seats, I'm going to move into the interior of the RS5 Sportback by showing you a rather odd quirk of the back seats, and specifically the rear windows, namely they only roll down this far. Now, a lot of people think this is for child safety, so a kid can't jump out the back, but that isn't true. There's no regulations about this. Instead, automakers can have the windows roll down as far as the door lets them. But in this case, based on the design of the car and the design of the door, the windows can only go this far before, I guess, they hit the wheel arch. And this is one of the most ridiculous window openings I've ever seen in any rational automobile. Even 1980s supercars had their windows open more than this. They only roll down about halfway, meaning if you're a rear seat passenger in an RS5 Sportback, you might be a little disappointed with how much breeze you can get as you're driving along. A couple of other items worth noting back here. One is the middle seat. This is one of the worst middle seats in the entire car industry. Not only is it tiny and squished and compact like most middle seats, but look at the legroom. There's a rather large center tunnel that comes up almost all the way to the seat, and there's absolutely no space for you to put your legs if you're a middle seat passenger. You're going to be really uncomfortable back here. This is not a car to be used if you actually have to transport 5 people frequently. And in fact, rear seat room in general is kind of a problem with the RS5 Sportback. It isn't huge back here. Legroom is okay, even for an adult like me, but headroom is really the problem for adults. Because of this car's kind of coupe-like profile, it robs you of some headroom, and as a result, there's just not as much room back here as maybe you would want. But that's the price you have to pay for the gorgeous styling of this car, and frankly, my opinion is, unless you're transporting a lot of people in the back seat frequently, it's a price that I'm willing to pay just because this car looks so good. Next, we move on to the front of the RS5 Sportback, where there are a couple of noteworthy quirks and features, starting with the volume knob thing. I just hate how Audi does volume knobs, because you're driving along and you go to change the radio volume and nope, that's the climate control temperature. Instead, they've placed the volume knob all the way over on the passenger side of the center console, basically in no man's land. Now, Audi would argue, well, we have a volume knob on the steering wheel, and that's fine, I guess. But it just seems to me to be a very unintuitive place, especially because they took the spot where you'd normally expect the volume knob and they put something different there. Next up, another interesting quirk of this car. It has a sunroof. You can open it up just like in most luxury cars. The interesting part is the fact that while the sunroof is open, you can close the sunshade. Now, in most cars, when you have the sunroof open, the sunshade is locked in place and you can't close it. But in this car, if for some reason you want to drive around with the sunroof open and the sunshade closed, you can do that. Now, next up, I want to talk about the placement of the center screen. I reviewed the RS7 last year, and when you turned off the center screen, it would sort of automatically fold itself back into the dashboard and look like it never existed in the first place. That's no longer the case, or at least not in this car. When you turn off the center screen, it just turns off. It is fixed in place and does not retreat into the dashboard. Now, there's a lot of kind of controversy about these stuck-on screens tacked onto the dashboard rather than integrated into the entire center control stack, and I'll leave that for you to debate, but the screen doesn't retreat into the car, and that's how it is. Now, next up, below the screen, one interesting item, you can see there are two climate control vents, just like normal, and there's a climate vent over on the passenger side of the dashboard, also like normal, but there's also this large central climate vent in the middle of the dashboard. I turn on the air conditioning and I can't seem to get any air to come out of this, so I don't know if it's a decorative climate vent or if it has some small purpose, but either way, it does help with the overall look of the dashboard. It's just one giant climate vent line across the middle. Still, it's kind of an odd thing to see there. Next, we move on to another interesting quirk inside this car, and that would be the turn signals. Now, you go to put on the turn signals and nothing particularly unusual happens except for the mirrors. Now, there's a turn signal on the outside of the mirrors, not all that weird. In fact, in Europe, it's mandated that all cars have some side marker that blinks when the turn signal is on for safer lane changes. But the weird thing is what happens on the inside of the mirror. A turn signal light comes on there too, pointing at the occupants of the car, I guess to let the driver know that the turn signal is on. Now, obviously, there's also a display in the gauge cluster that shows the turn signal's on, but you can also look in your mirror and see if the turn signal's on. Very strange item, but Audi does it. Now, for another strange item that Audi does, I want to talk about storage in this car. Two rather interesting storage compartments. One is just to the right of the gear lever in the center console below the volume knob, and that would be this tiny little storage compartment that can barely hold a finger. I'm not sure exactly what you're supposed to put in here. Paper clips in your RS5 Sportback? But I guess they had a little extra room, so they figured, why not make a small storage compartment? So that's an unusually small storage compartment, but how about an unusually large one? To the left of the steering wheel, to the left of your knee, there's a little storage compartment. Not all that strange. A lot of cars have it there, but most cars don't have this. Take a look at this. I'm sticking my arm in this thing, and I can get my arm in this compartment up to my elbow. It is excessively long. In case you've ever wanted to transport a baseball bat in a small hidden storage compartment in your dashboard. Very strange. Now, next up, I want to talk about the technology and the screens in this car, but I've covered Audi's latest infotainment system in a lot of other Audi reviews I've done, the RS3, the Q8, the R8, and I'll link those videos in the description below. In this video, I'm only going to highlight a few of the more interesting features. For example, one interesting item in the gauge cluster is the fact that the default display shows your power and torque percentages used, and there's even a little boost gauge on the bottom. So instead of showing, what radio channel you're on or what phone call you're making, which is configurable on the other side of the display, it shows those performance metrics, which is cool in a performance car like this one. Now, next up, I'm going to cover a couple of quirks of the infotainment system, the center screen, that I hadn't noticed before, starting with the tire pressure monitor. Now, if you go into the infotainment displays, you can have the car tell you what your current tire pressures are, although you'll notice if you try to do it, it says that it can't measure the tire pressures unless you're going over 16 miles an hour. Now, this seems suspect to me because I could just get out while the car stopped right now with a tire gauge and measure my tire pressures, an old school mechanical gauge. Meanwhile, this fancy electronic system in the infotainment screen requires you to be going a certain speed before it can measure the tire pressure. It's ridiculous. But the best feature of the infotainment system is the Audi Connect area, which I've never really explored before, but I have now, and I am oh so glad that I did. Now we start with fuel prices. Audi Connect will show you all of the fuel prices in gas stations around you, which is actually surprisingly helpful and useful. Although there's an odd quirk to it. You can click on a gas station. I'm going to choose this random Shell, and you can see there's some weirdnesses. For example, mid-grade with a lowercase g is $3.53 a gallon, but mid-grade with an uppercase G is $3.59 a gallon. Not really sure what the difference there is. Also, you can see that this gas station is still selling leaded fuel, which doesn't exactly seem correct. So maybe this isn't the most wildly accurate system, but it is cool to have that you can just scroll around and see local fuel prices without actually having to visit each gas station to see where you can get cheaper gas. But Audi Connect gets even better than that. It also has an events tab where you can see local events going on around you. For example, here's the local Flex Golf Tour launch party, and you can also check out a bar trivia game, and it tells you what date and time and where all that is occurring. So if you've ever felt your social life isn't what you hoped it would be, get an RS5 Sportback. Not so you can meet people who are interested in the car, but instead so you have access to Audi's events section, and you can go check out the local social scene in your community. But the best item in that Audi Connect screen, this one is incredible. It's called Traffic Light Recommendation. Now you click on that and take a look what it says. It will recommend the best speed to reach the next traffic light on green, and if you have to stop at red, it will predict the waiting time at this particular red traffic light. I've never heard of this before, never seen this before. This is really crazy and really futuristic. It will tell you, for example, go 40 miles an hour and you'll hit the next light on green. I don't know how it does it. I don't know how it's that smart. I don't know how frequently it actually works and syncs up to traffic lights, but that is a pretty cool futuristic piece of technology. And our final interesting and pretty cool piece of technology in this car is the mobile device reminder. Now this car has a wireless charging tray, so you can stick your phone on the charging tray and it will charge without you having to plug it in. But obviously when you do that, you might forget it inside the car. And this car has a little reminder letting you know if you turn it off and you're about to get out that your mobile phone is still in the car. Now, the interesting thing about this reminder is you can choose between a tone and a spoken cue. And if you choose the spoken cue, you can set the volume at which it speaks to you to remind you that you've left your phone in the car. Take a listen.
Your cell phone is still in the vehicle. Your cell phone is still in the vehicle. Your cell phone is still in the vehicle. Your cell phone is still in the vehicle.
Your cell phone is still in the vehicle. Your cell phone is still in the vehicle. Your cell phone is still in the vehicle. Those are the quirks and features of the Audi RS5 Sportback. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the RS5 Sportback. I really like the sort of point and shoot, nimble character of this car. The same thing the RS3 has. Not quite the same thing the RS7 has. The RS7 is definitely more of a brute, fast, giant power kind of car. This car feels more zippy and fun, and I kind of like that personally, although I know some people prefer the big old torque monster muscle car type. Good driving feel. Throttle tip-in is actually surprisingly delayed. I'm in dynamic mode, which is the best sport mode that it has. And I'm surprised, you drop the throttle an inch or so and it takes a second. Not only is it a relatively small engine, but it's turbocharged. So the car needs a little bit of time to react to the throttle input, which surprises me actually a little bit. Sitting in a stoplight, the car is really comfortable and really quiet, and it sort of gives you an opportunity to take a look around the materials. And in this car, a lot of the stuff is really, really nice. Everything is super high quality. I love the sort of perforated leather on the steering wheel. It just looks and feels really nice. Ride is actually pretty nice. I was expecting it to be harsh given the size of the wheels, the 20-inch wheels, and relatively thin tires, but the ride quality is actually pretty good, even in dynamic mode, which I'm in now. Now, the one thing about that acceleration, yeah, the throttle tip-in is a little slow, but if you floor it, you take off. Car feels very, very quick, when you're really accelerating around. Transmission is incredibly quick to respond to any input you give it. More importantly than just how quick it is, and it is how zippy and sort of sporty it is. And I think that that's one of the things that I like the best about this car. The RS7 is too expensive, too big, too powerful. It seems like overkill. This car doesn't seem like that. It's sort of just the right amount of power. $85,000 is a lot of money, but it's not $120 for an RS7. This car is sort of right in the wheelhouse in terms of size and everything. I feel like if it was me buying, I don't have kids, I would probably go with the RS3 just because it's a substantial price difference and the power difference isn't all that much. If it was 470, 480 horsepower for this price, I think that would be a much easier walk to this car. With that said, the cargo space in this car and the usability and the practicality is not something to be pushed aside compared to RS3 and C63. It's really impressive back there, and that matters to some people. Even though it's a performance car, people who live in a big city, they only have one car, they have a budget they gotta stick to, they can't get, you know, a Porsche for the weekends and a sedan and an SUV, whatever. You wanna combine it all into one. This car has more cargo space with the seats up than a Panamera, which is really impressive because it's way, way shorter than a Panamera, not even on the same plane. And so the result to me is it may not be the fastest car in the segment, but it's a really complete package. It's beautiful, it's more practical than rivals. It's just an excellent vehicle all around. And so that's the new 2019 Audi RS5 Sportback. This car is fast, it's handsome, it's well built with a great interior, it has a lot of tech, and it's more usable than rivals, which are just normal sedans without this car's hatchback practicality. The RS5 Sportback is a combination of a lot of things that I like, and it's my favorite new Audi. And now it's time to give this car a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the RS5 Sportback is gorgeous for a car like this, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration 0 to 60 is 3.9 seconds, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Handling is great. It's nimble and fun, though a little over-assisted, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is strong. This car has a kick to drive, surprisingly so, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Cool factor, however, is a bit lower. This is one for enthusiasts, and it won't have much weight outside car people circles, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 33 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The RS5 Sportback is very well equipped and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is good, normal for the class, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is very good. The interior is gorgeous, though not quite on par with the slightly nicer RS7, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is excellent with nearly 35 cubic feet of cargo volume, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, value is good. This car is well priced, though a bit expensive considering it's more money than the C63, but less power. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 35 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 68 out of 100, which is a very solid figure, and it puts the RS5 Sportback here against rivals. It beats out the Panamera Turbo, which is just too expensive and not fun or handsome enough to compete. The RS5 Sportback can't quite beat out the RS7, though, which is faster, more fun, more practical, and nicer inside, but then the RS7 had better get a better score since it's way more expensive. For the money, the RS5 Sportback is the one to have, at least in my opinion.
In order for the turn signal to be seen.